There's a sound rising up in the city. There's a light breaking out in the night. Every voice lifting higher together. Every heart coming back to life.
From the beginning of Scripture, one of the quiet wonders of redemption is that the Lord often reveals royal and covenant mysteries through the lives of ordinary people. Sometimes that pattern appears in the language of majesty, as in Psalm 45, where the king stands in beauty and strength, and the bride is brought before him in honor. But at other times, the same pattern appears in humbler places, in fields, in households, in journeys marked by sorrow and return. The book of Ruth is one of those places. Its story moves with simplicity, yet beneath that simplicity there shines a deep pattern of covenant love, restoration, and the rising of a royal house. When Ruth enters the narrative, she does not enter as a daughter of the Hebrew line. She is a Moabite woman. She stands outside the seed of Jacob by birth, and yet the story does not leave her there. Through devotion, humility, and covenant faithfulness, she is drawn into a place of belonging. This is one of the first reasons the book carries such power. It is not merely the account of a widow surviving hardship. It is the account of a woman from outside the Hebrew people being brought near through faithfulness, and through that nearness, becoming part of a household whose future had nearly perished. The ancient witnesses preserved this movement with beautiful harmony. In the Hebrew text, in the Peshitta tradition, and in the Ethiopian tradition, the same central testimony remains. Naomi returns to Bethlehem marked by loss. Ruth clings to her with steadfast devotion. Boaz appears as the Redeemer who shelters, restores, and acts with righteousness. And the end of the story reveals that what seemed small and domestic was carrying a much greater purpose all along. Bethlehem itself becomes part of the mystery. The house of bread begins the story amid a famine. Naomi leaves that place in grief, and when she returns, she speaks as one emptied by sorrow. Yet Ruth comes with her, and in that return, a new beginning has already entered the land. The story does not rush. It moves through harvest, gleaning, quiet acts of kindness, counsel, waiting, and covenant action. But all the while, the house that seemed empty is being prepared for restoration. Ruth first appears in humility, gleaning in the field. She does not seize honor for herself. She gathers what falls behind the reapers. Yet the Redeemer notices her. Boaz sees the woman who has come to seek refuge among the people of the God of Jacob, and he speaks words of blessing over her. He extends protection, provision, and favor. The distance between the gleaner and the master of the field begins to close. The woman who stood at the edge of the provision is gradually drawn nearer to the heart of the household. This is one of the reasons the story has long been read with bridal sensitivity. Ruth's path is not sudden. It is a movement inward. She enters the field. She receives favor. She is invited to the table. She approaches the threshing floor. She asks for covering. The matter of redemption is settled at the gate. The stranger becomes the bride, and the house that trembled on the edge of extinction begins to live again. In this way, the book of Ruth quietly echoes the same covenant movement that shines in Psalm 45. There, the bride is brought before the king in beauty. Here, the bride comes in humility through harvest and household life. There, the union is sung in royal language. Here, it unfolds in daily faithfulness. Yet the movement is the same. The bride is brought near. The covenant bond is established. And from that union, the future of the kingdom begins to rise. As the story draws near its close, the restoration becomes even more luminous. Ruth bears a son, and the women of Bethlehem gather around Naomi. These women had witnessed her return in grief. They had seen the bitterness that shadowed her house, but now they stand as witnesses to a different reality. The emptiness is no longer the final word. Naomi holds a child in her arms, and the house has been visited by mercy. Their words over Ruth carry unusual depth. They declare that Ruth, the daughter-in-law who loved Naomi, is better to her than 7 sons. In the language of Scripture, 7 speaks of fullness and completion. To say that Ruth is better than 7 sons is to say that the restoration brought through her exceeds expectation. This is not a small repair of what was broken. This is fullness entering the house again. The woman who is not of the Hebrew line has become the vessel through which the household receives abundance, renewal, and future. This is where the pattern of the daughter and the bride becomes especially beautiful. Ruth enters as one from outside the Hebrew people, yet through covenant devotion she is brought near, received, and established within the restored house. She is not presented first in outward splendor, but in loyalty, humility, and steadfast love. Yet by the end of the narrative, she stands in the center of a restored lineage. The one who gleaned in the field becomes the honored woman through whom the royal future begins to grow. The birth of Obed confirms that the story was always larger than personal comfort alone. Obed becomes the father of Jesse, and Jesse becomes the father of David. The line of kingship rises from this union. What seemed to be the quiet healing of one wounded household becomes the beginning of a royal future in Bethlehem. The house restored through the Redeemer becomes the root from which the royal line emerges. And here, the connection with Psalm 45 becomes even more striking. In the psalm, the bride stands in relation to the king, and the union opens into royal fruitfulness. In Ruth, that same mystery appears in narrative form. The Redeemer receives the bride, the household is restored, and from that covenant union the royal line comes forth. One text sings the mystery, the other embodies it. One reveals it in a royal procession, the other reveals it in harvest, waiting, and redemption at the gate. But both witness to the same truth: the bride is brought near, the covenant is established, and the future of the kingdom rises from that union. So the book closes with more than a happy ending. It closes with unveiled restoration. Naomi is comforted. Ruth is established. The house is renewed. The women of Bethlehem discern fullness where sorrow had once reigned, and the genealogy seals the matter, showing that the hand of God was guiding every step toward a royal purpose. In this way, Ruth becomes a witness to the mystery of how the Lord brings the bride near, how he restores what grief has emptied, and how from covenant union he causes royal life to spring forth in the land. The pattern of the daughter, the bride, and the restored house shines here in quiet form. It is veiled in gleaning, harvest, and homecoming, yet it stands clearly for those who read with care. The Redeemer receives the bride. The house is filled again, and from Bethlehem the royal promise begins to rise. When the women of Bethlehem speak over Naomi and Ruth, the closing scene of the book begins to shine with even greater depth. Their words are gentle, but they carry the weight of recognition. They had seen Naomi depart years earlier in the days of famine. They had seen her return marked by sorrow, speaking as one emptied by grief. Now they stand in the same town and behold a reversal that only covenant mercy could bring. Naomi is no longer standing in loss. She is holding life in her arms, and the women do not speak only of the child, they speak of Ruth. They testify that the one who loved Naomi, the one who remained with her, the one who entered Bethlehem in humility, has become better to her than 7 sons. That statement captures the story's meaning. Ruth is not being praised merely for kindness. She is being recognized as the vessel through whom fullness has entered the house again. This makes the ending of Ruth especially beautiful. The restoration does not come through visible power, public greatness, or military strength. It comes through devotion, covenant faithfulness, humble labor, patient waiting, and the righteous action of the Redeemer. The house is restored through love that remains steadfast when everything else has been stripped away. There is something else that becomes very striking here. The women of Bethlehem speak almost like witnesses, standing at the threshold of a mystery larger than they can fully see. They know a household has been restored. They know Naomi has not been left empty. They know Ruth has become the source of renewal in the land. But the reader is allowed to see even more than they see, because the genealogy that follows opens the story outward into the future. The child in Naomi's arms is not only a comfort for the present moment, he is part of a royal unfolding. Obed becomes the father of Jesse, Jesse becomes the father of David, and from that point onward, the quiet story of gleaning and redemption must be read in the light of kingship. The field of Boaz was never only a field. The threshing floor was never only a threshing floor. The gate was never only the place where one family's legal matter was settled. All of it was part of the shaping of the royal line in Bethlehem. This is one of the reasons the book of Ruth carries such a deep resonance with the themes of the bride and the daughter. The story shows that what appears small in the eyes of men may carry the seed of a kingdom. A faithful woman from outside the Hebrew line enters the covenant house, and through her, the future of the royal line begins to rise. The bride is received, and the kingdom grows from that union. In this way, the book preserves a holy reversal. The one who seemed far off is brought near. The house that seemed empty is filled. The field becomes the place of recognition. The threshing floor becomes the place of covenant nearness. The gate becomes the place of lawful restoration. And Bethlehem becomes the place where the royal promise begins to grow. What happened in Ruth is not only a family story, it is a pattern. It reveals how the Lord restores by drawing near what seemed distant, by giving covering where there had been vulnerability, and by causing life to spring forth where sorrow seemed to have spoken the final word. This is why Ruth remains so luminous when read alongside the language of Psalm 45. In the psalm, the bride is brought near to the king and honor surrounds the union. In Ruth, the same mystery appears clothed in the simplicity of daily life. There is no royal procession at first, no palace music, no public splendor. There is a field, a widow, a redeemer, and a household in need of restoration. Yet by the time the story closes, the royal meaning has become unmistakable. The bride has been brought near. The covenant bond has been established. The line of kingship has begun to rise. And so the book leaves us with a vision of redemption that is both tender and majestic. The Lord does not despise the small beginning. He does not overlook the widow, the stranger, the gleaner, or the bitter house. He visits the broken place, orders the steps of the faithful, and causes restoration to unfold with wisdom and gentleness. Then, from that restored place, he causes the royal future to emerge. The house of bread, which once knew famine, becomes the place of provision again. The woman who returned speaking of bitterness becomes the one who holds promise in her arms. The bride who entered the land in humility becomes the mother within a restored house, and the town that witnessed sorrow becomes the town where the line of David begins to rise. So the story closes in quiet glory. The Redeemer has received the bride, the house has been filled again, the witnesses have spoken, the child has been named, and the genealogy has revealed that beneath the tenderness of this story, the hand of God was preparing the future of the kingdom in the land. And when we linger a little longer over that closing scene, another gentle brightness begins to appear. Naomi does not simply receive comfort, she becomes a witness to the fact that emptiness is not always the end of the story. At the beginning of the book, her words were heavy with loss. She spoke as one whose fullness had been taken away. But by the end, the same arms that returned from exile, empty, now hold the child through whom the future of the house will continue. This reversal is one of the most beautiful features of Ruth. The Lord does not answer Naomi only by restoring material provision. He restores memory, lineage, hope, and place. The house that had nearly disappeared is established again. The name that seemed ready to vanish is carried forward. The sorrow that once defined the household no longer rules it. And Ruth stands at the center of that restoration. She entered Bethlehem without status, without inheritance, and without claim. She came only with devotion, fidelity, and the courage to remain near Naomi and near the God of Jacob. Yet through that path of quiet faithfulness, she is received into the house of the Redeemer. The one who began as a gleaner becomes the mother of a line that will reach David. The one who seemed least likely to stand in the center of the story becomes the very vessel through whom the future is opened. This is why the book carries such a deep bridal resonance. The bride in Scripture is often recognized not only by outward beauty, but by nearness, loyalty, covenant faithfulness, and readiness to come under the covering prepared for her. Ruth embodies that movement in living form. She does not force herself into the promise. She walks toward it step by step. She remains faithful in the field. She receives favor with humility. She comes under the covering. And in the end, she stands within the restored house, no longer at its edge, but at its heart. For those who read the story slowly, this becomes a profound witness to the mystery of redemption. The Lord brings near those who seemed far off. He gives a place within the house to those who entered with nothing but faithfulness. He turns gleaning into belonging, waiting into covenant, and hidden sorrow into the beginning of a royal future. And here, the connection with the daughter of Zion becomes even more tender. The daughter is often shown in Scripture as one who must be gathered, restored, adorned, and brought into her appointed place. In Ruth, that pattern is present in seed form. The woman from outside the Hebrew line is brought into covenant nearness. The one who walked in humility is raised into honor. The one who shared Naomi's sorrow becomes the source of Naomi's renewal. The one who entered Bethlehem as a stranger becomes part of the very line through which the royal promise grows. The story, therefore, closes with more than genealogy. It closes with recognition. The women recognize fullness. Naomi recognizes mercy. The reader recognizes design. What seemed at first like a small and tender domestic narrative is revealed to be part of the shaping of kingship itself. Obed becomes the father of Jesse. Jesse becomes the father of David. Those names do not appear accidentally. They reveal that from covenant union, royal life emerges. The Redeemer receives the bride, and from that union the kingdom begins to take root in Bethlehem. What Psalm 45 celebrates in royal song, Ruth prepares in quiet narrative form. The bride and the royal future belong together. The house, restored through covenant, becomes the place where the line of rule begins to rise. So the book leaves behind a holy testimony. Redemption is not only a rescue from loss, it is restored to its place. It is the gathering of the faithful into the house. It is the rising up of a future where sorrow thought it had finished its work. It is the covering of the bride, the healing of the household, and the quiet beginning of the kingdom in the land. And this is why Ruth remains so luminous among the writings. It shows that the Lord can take famine, widowhood, foreignness, and grief, and from those very places bring forth covenant beauty. He can take the field and make it the place of recognition. He can take the threshing floor and make it the place of nearness. He can take the gate and make it the place of lawful restoration. He can take Bethlehem, the house of bread, and make it again the place where life is given for the sake of the future. The Redeemer has received the bride. The house has been filled. The witnesses have spoken. The lineage has been established. And beneath the quiet tenderness of the story, the royal purpose of God has begun to rise in the land. When ancient readers lingered over the close of Ruth, they did not see only the happiness of a marriage. They saw restoration entering an empty house. This is one of the quiet emphases that rises from older readings of the book. The women of Bethlehem do not speak first about romance. They speak about Naomi's life being restored, her old age being sustained, and the daughter-in-law who loves her being better to her than 7 sons. Ancient Jewish readings press into that moment and see the healing of Naomi's emptiness as one of the great revelations at the end of the story. What began in famine, loss, and sorrow closes with life returning to the house. This gives the story a different kind of brightness. Ruth is not only the faithful woman who finds a husband, she becomes the one through whom fullness enters again, where loss had seemed to speak the final word. The words of the women of Bethlehem carry that meaning with unusual force. To be called better than 7 sons is not a small compliment. In the language of Scripture, 7 carries the sense of fullness and completion. So the blessing over Ruth does not merely honor her kindness, it recognizes that through her, the house has received an answer greater than expected. Older readers also notice the beauty of the covering in the story. Boaz first blesses Ruth as one who has come to seek refuge under the wings of the God of Jacob. Later, at the threshing floor, Ruth asks Boaz to spread his own covering over her. The movement is profound. The covering of God, spoken in blessing, begins to take visible form through the action of the Redeemer. This is one of the most beautiful covenant movements in the book. Ruth is not grasping for position. She is seeking refuge, belonging, and lawful restoration beneath the covering appointed for her. This is where the pattern becomes especially fitting for those who read Ruth with bridal sensitivity. Ruth begins outside the Hebrew line, at the edge of the field, gathering what falls behind the reapers. Yet she does not remain at the edge. She is noticed, she is blessed, she is brought under a covering. And by the end of the book, she stands at the center of a restored house. That is why Ruth carries such a quiet likeness to the bride. She is brought from distance into nearness, from vulnerability into covering, from sorrow's shadow into covenant belonging. The Peshitta preserves this movement with striking clarity. Ruth's covenant declaration remains strong. Your people is my people, and your God, my God. The same witness preserves Boaz's blessing over Ruth for seeking refuge, and it preserves the women's final declaration that she is better than 7 sons. The line of the book remains firm from devotion to covering to restoration to the birth of the royal future. The Ethiopic witness also stands with the book as an ancient textual tradition. While the wording available to me here is not as easily accessible in a trustworthy line-by-line English form as the Peshitta material, Ruth is preserved within the Ge'ez biblical tradition as part of that older stream of witness. So when the story is read across these ancient traditions, the same central shape remains visible. Ruth's devotion, Boaz's righteous covering, Naomi's restoration, and the royal future rising from Bethlehem. The story does not end by drawing our attention only to a couple. It ends by unveiling a restored house, a woman from outside the Hebrew line brought fully under the covering, and the royal future beginning to rise in Bethlehem. Ruth fills Naomi's emptiness. The Redeemer gives lawful covering, and from that covenant union, the line of David begins to grow. So the closing of Ruth can be heard as a quiet revelation of the daughter and the bride. She comes from outside the Hebrew people, yet she is brought near. She enters in humility, yet she becomes the source of fullness. She begins in gleaning, yet she ends within the restored house. And from that hidden, tender covenant story, the royal promise begins to rise in the house of bread. And when Ruth is placed beside Psalm 45, the quiet beauty of her story begins to shine with even greater depth. Psalm 45 presents the royal pattern in the language of majesty. The king stands in splendor, anointed with grace, and the bride is brought before him in honor. She is clothed in beauty, brought near in joy, and from that union the future of the royal house is set before us. The psalm is filled with fragrance, gold, procession, and royal dignity. Ruth carries the same mystery, but in a gentler form. In Psalm 45, the bride is brought before the king. In Ruth, the woman is brought step by step toward the Redeemer. She enters the field, receives favor, comes under covering, and is established within the restored house. One text sings the mystery openly. The other lets it unfold through harvest, waiting, and covenant faithfulness. Yet the pattern is the same. In Psalm 45, the bride is called to forget her father's house and to draw near to the king. In Ruth, the same movement appears in living form. Ruth leaves her own people and her familiar land behind. She cleaves to Naomi, enters Bethlehem, and walks toward the house of the Redeemer. Her journey is not only geographical, it is covenantal. She leaves one world behind and enters another through devotion, humility, and faithfulness. In Psalm 45, the bride stands in honor at the king's side. In Ruth, that honor is not shown first in jewels or palace courts, but in nearness, in covering, in lawful redemption, and in the blessing spoken over her by the women of Bethlehem. She who began at the edge of the field is no longer at the edge by the end. She stands within the restored house as the honored woman who will continue the household's future. And there is something even more beautiful here. Psalm 45 is not only about beauty, it is also about kingship. The marriage of the king and the bride is bound to the continuation of royal life in the land. Ruth carries this same royal outcome in narrative form. Her union with the Redeemer does not end with private happiness alone. It opens into genealogy. Obed is born. Jesse follows. Then David rises. The quiet covenant union in Bethlehem becomes the root from which the royal line grows. So the royal song of Psalm 45 and the quiet harvest story of Ruth are not far from one another. They are two witnesses to the same mystery. One reveals the bride in majesty, the other reveals the bride in humility. One places her in the king's court, the other leads her through the field, the threshing floor, and the gate. But both reveal that the bride is brought near, received in covenant, and joined to a future that carries royal promise. This is why Ruth can be heard as a softer echo of the daughter of Zion. In Psalm 45, the bridal figure shines in royal language. In Ruth, the same bridal pattern is veiled within the life of an ordinary household. Yet the daughter theme is still present. She is gathered. She is brought near. She is established in honor. And from her union with the Redeemer, the royal future begins to rise. What Psalm 45 declares with music and procession, Ruth prepares in grain and homecoming. What the psalm reveals in golden garments, Ruth reveals in covenant faithfulness. What the psalm celebrates in the palace, Ruth plants in the soil of Bethlehem. And this is what gives the book its quiet radiance. The bride is not only the one adorned at the end, she is also the one guided through the path that leads to nearness. She is the one brought from outside into belonging, from vulnerability into covering, from emptiness into fullness. Ruth embodies that journey. Psalm 45 reveals its royal meaning. So when these two portions of Scripture are read together, the picture becomes luminous. Ruth shows the bride entering the covenant house through humble faithfulness. Psalm 45 reveals the same bride standing in royal honor. Ruth shows the beginning in Bethlehem. Psalm 45 reveals the splendor of the union. Ruth shows the seed of kingship rising quietly from the restored house. Psalm 45 announces the royal beauty of that covenant mystery in full song. Together they bear witness to the same pattern. The bride is brought near, the Redeemer receives her, the house is established, and from that covenant union the royal promise begins to shine in the land. This layer is the movement from veiled bride to revealed royal mother. In Ruth, the bride is not revealed all at once. She is first seen in humility, almost veiled within ordinary life. She appears in mourning, in gleaning, in quiet devotion, in patient labor. Nothing in the beginning of the story outwardly announces royal destiny. She is not introduced with splendor. She is introduced with loyalty, and this is part of the book's beauty. The royal future is already present, but it is veiled. Ruth enters Bethlehem carrying no visible sign that she will become part of the line through which David will arise. She walks into the story as one who looks small in the eyes of the world. She gathers grain in the field. She follows Naomi quietly. She waits for the word of the Redeemer. Her glory is hidden inside faithfulness. Then, step by step, what was veiled begins to be revealed. The gleaner is revealed as the bride. The bride is revealed as the restorer of Naomi's house. And the restored woman is revealed as the mother within the royal line. This is one of the deepest ways Ruth connects with the daughter pattern. The daughter is often present before she is recognized. She is near before she is honored. She carries within herself a future that others cannot yet see. And only at the end does the full meaning of her place begin to appear. In Ruth, this unveiling happens through the birth of Obed. Before the child is born, Ruth is known as the faithful woman, the devoted daughter-in-law, the one who found favor with the Redeemer. But after the child is born, the meaning of her place expands. She is now seen as the one through whom the house is renewed and the royal line begins to rise. So the story does not stop at the bridal union. It moves into fruitfulness. This is important because Psalm 45 also points beyond the wedding itself. The royal union is not presented as an end in itself. It opens into continuity, inheritance, and the future of rule in the land. The same is true in Ruth. The union of the bride and the Redeemer opens into the birth of a lineage. The bride becomes fruitful, and through that fruitfulness, the kingdom begins to grow. That is another reason the story feels so full. Ruth is not only the bride brought near, she is also the woman who carries the future. Her path moves from outsider to bride to mother within the royal house. This gives the narrative a quiet majesty. At first, she stands outside the Hebrew line. Then she enters covenant nearness. Then she comes under the Redeemer's covering. Then she stands within the restored house. Then she bears the child through whom the royal future continues. The movement is astonishingly complete. And it shows that the mystery of the bride in Scripture is not only about being chosen or adorned, it is also about being brought into fruitfulness for the sake of the kingdom. The bride is received, but she is also established. She is loved, but she is also entrusted with the future. This is where Ruth becomes especially radiant when read beside Psalm 45. In the psalm, the bride stands in beauty at the king's side. In Ruth, the same bride is seen first in hiddenness, then in nearness, and finally in fruitfulness. One text reveals the splendor of the royal union, the other reveals the path by which the bride arrives there. So another quiet witness begins to appear. Ruth is first veiled in ordinary life, then revealed in covenant honor, and finally established as a mother within the royal future. That is a very deep bridal pattern. And it means the story of Ruth is not only about a marriage, it is the story of unveiling. The one who seemed small is revealed as central. The one who seemed outside is brought into the heart of the house. The one who enters in sorrow becomes the bearer of future joy. And the one who gleaned in the fields of Bethlehem becomes part of the royal promise growing in the land. At the gate of Bethlehem, when the matter of redemption is being confirmed before the elders and the people, the blessing spoken over Ruth opens yet another beautiful layer in the story. The witnesses do not speak casually. They call upon the memory of the women through whom the house was built. They bless Ruth with the names of Rachel and Leah, the mothers who built the house, and they also speak of Tamar and Perez. In that moment, Ruth is not being welcomed only as a woman who is about to be married. She is being received into a much older pattern of house building, fruitfulness, and lineage. This makes the gate scene shine with a deeper radiance. Ruth had entered Bethlehem as a Moabite woman, not of the Hebrew line. She had come in humility, in sorrow, and in quiet devotion. Yet at the gate, before the witnesses of the town, she is blessed with the names of women whose lives were bound to the building of the house and the carrying forward of the line. The blessing does not leave her standing at the edge of the story. It brings her into the center of the house itself. She is no longer only the gleaner in the field or the faithful widow who came with Naomi. She is now spoken of as one who will enter the house and take her place among the women through whom the future is carried forward. The mention of Tamar is especially striking. Tamar's story, like Ruth's, is bound to the preservation of a name and the continuation of a household line. Her son, Perez, becomes part of the very genealogy that stands behind the ending of Ruth. So when the elders bless Boaz and Ruth with the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, they are placing Ruth's union inside a pattern where loss is turned into continuation, where what seemed interrupted is carried forward again, and where the future of the house is secured through the woman who enters under covenant order. This reveals something very beautiful about Ruth. She is not only the bride who is received by the Redeemer, she is also the woman who strengthens the house. Rachel and Leah are remembered as those who built the house. Tamar stands behind the Perez line named at the gate, and Ruth is now blessed to stand in that same stream. The bride is brought near, but she is brought near for more than personal comfort. She is brought into fruitfulness, into house building, and into the continuation of the line. This is where the connection with Psalm 45 grows even deeper. In the psalm, the bride is brought near to the king in honor, yet the union is never only about beauty. It opens into a royal future and the continuation of the house. Ruth carries that same mystery in a quieter form. At the gate, where the marriage is established lawfully before the people, the blessing spoken over her immediately turns toward fruitfulness, lineage, and the building of the house. The bride is being received not only into nearness, but into the future of the covenant household. There is also a tenderness in the naming of Rachel within this Bethlehem setting. Ancient commentary notes the fittingness of Rachel's name here because her memory was associated with Bethlehem. So the blessing spoken at the gate is not only about the women of the past, it is also tied to the place itself, to the mothers, to the land, and to the future that is beginning to rise there. The town that witnessed Naomi's sorrow now becomes the place where Ruth is blessed as one entering the line of the house builders. So the gate becomes more than a legal setting. It becomes a place of recognition. The bride is received. The witnesses speak. The mothers of the house are remembered. Tamar's line is invoked, and Ruth stands among them as the woman through whom the future of the house will continue. The one who entered Bethlehem in humility is blessed in the language of builders, mothers, and lineage. The one who gleaned at the edge of the field is now placed within the stream of the women through whom the royal promise moves forward in the land. In this way, the story of Ruth becomes even more luminous. The bride is not only brought under the covering, she is established within the house. She is not only received by the Redeemer, she is blessed as one who will build. She is not only joined in a covenant union, she is placed within the living memory of Rachel, Leah, and Tamar, the women whose names are bound to the carrying forward of the line. And from that union, from that house, and from that blessing at the gate, the royal future begins to rise in Bethlehem. And so the story closes with a quiet greatness. The woman who entered Bethlehem in humility is no longer standing at the edge of the field. She has been brought into the house, received under covering, blessed among the women who build the line, and established within a future far greater than she could have seen when she first arrived beside Naomi. The witnesses have spoken, the blessing has been given, the house has been strengthened, and from that union the royal future begins to rise in the land. What seemed at first to be only the story of sorrow, harvest, and redemption is revealed to be something deeper. The bride has been brought near, the house has been built again, the lineage has been carried forward. And Bethlehem, the place that once knew emptiness, becomes the place where promise begins to shine. In this way, Ruth remains a gentle but powerful witness to the mystery of covenant restoration. The one who came from outside is brought near. The one who walked in humility is established in honor. The one who enters in loss becomes part of the future of the kingdom. And from that restored house, the royal promise begins to rise. Thank you, family, for being here. If this teaching helped you, please like, comment, and share. It truly helps this message reach those who are seeking. To our new subscribers, welcome. And if you'd like to go deeper, we invite you to join as a member. The link is in the description and on our homepage. We are praying for you and standing with you in the light of Messiah, He, and Messiah, She. If you'd like to support the ministry, you can visit our store or bless our dear brother Michael via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description below, which also includes a link to our second store with new designs. Thank you for your love and encouragement, and stay tuned for the next video. May the spirit of wisdom and peace rest upon you always.